Scenario is, how do you get people to have to live under this without clamping down on the people? Civil rights, freedom of speech, what does that look like in 2014? Onkar Ghate, he is a senior fellow at the Ayn Rand Institute. Onkar, tell me a little bit about what you see happening with freedom of speech in a scenario like this. How does the government need to keep people muted in a situation where things have really fallen apart?
Yeah, I think so. In this kind of nightmare scenario that you're envisioning, what would happen is that the government wouldn't tolerate any kind of objections and dissent, and what would happen is that there would be a clampdown on free speech, particularly, I think, political speech. And we've seen precursors of that with, say, McCain-Feingold Act, which is an assault on the First Amendment rights, which tells people you can't spend your money to advocate for views you want. It tells you when you can do it. It puts periods when no one's allowed to speak or some groups aren't allowed to speak. And we would see a real extension of that so that the people in political power can hold on to their power. To get a real collapse in a dictatorship, it's one-party rule. But to get that, you really have to silence other people. And that you can only do that by infringing on their free speech rights and making a mockery of the First Amendment.
I'm not sure if you are, and I don't mean to insult you by any stretch of the imagination. We just haven't had a chance to talk beforehand. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the history of Woodrow Wilson or Franklin, or even Truman. We've done this before, and it was always wrapped in Uncle Sam and the flag. We have clamped down on people. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, back in the early 1900s, we had 150,000 people that were political prisoners that were in jail for speaking out against World War I. So this isn't a crazy scenario.
No, I don't think it is.
Right. This has happened before. So what are besides what would be the signs, the road signs along the road to 2014 that we should be aware of?
I think extensions of McCain-Feingold, extensions of, well, there's some political speech that is okay and other speech isn't, and it's the government that gets to decide which is which. If we start seeing, as we've seen, stimulus czars, regulatory czars, if we start seeing speech czars, we're down the road to a real dictatorship, and that will be really scary. Okay,
let me go back to Gerald here for just a second. Tell me what life is like for the average person, and Stephen, chime in on this. Do we have the neighborhoods that we're living in? Are we still living in our homes?
Think gated communities. I mean, you were talking about this before. You know, those countries you were talking about in those cities like Mexico City. Those are the rich people live in fortresses, right, with armed guards, and the masses. And as you said, people get kidnapped when they go outside the fortress, and you've essentially privatized security and all the other kind of government functions because government breaks down. Isn't that what happens in these countries?
And the other thing, even these gated communities won't be safe because you're going to see criminality. You're going to see gangs like you've never seen before. Listen, when people have nothing left to lose and they've lost everything, they lose it. And now you have a society. We're a descending society. I mean, you look at the high school graduation rates. You have under 50% in major cities. So now you have these people, and I'm not a classist. I'm a guy that was born in the Bronx, you know. Right. You have people that are ignorant, functionally illiterate, and whacked out on drugs, hillbilly heroin, you name it, meth, go down the line, and they have nothing to lose. You know, I'm a practitioner, close combat practitioner. Attackproof.com is my instructing teachers, John Perkins. And he's a self-defense expert. He's a close combat. #1, anybody that wants to look him up, he's there. You know what he teaches us? He teaches us to prepare for the worst, survival. And then you back off from that. So let's look what you're doing. You're doing the perfect thing. You're building the worst-case scenario. From that, we could back off. But people better realize that the worst-case scenario could actually happen. 9/11 happened. This could happen. An economic 9/11, the likes of which we've never seen.
I will tell you that it's deja vu all over again, if you will. For me, back in 1999, I was on WABC, and I had never even heard of Osama bin Laden. I read something, and And I read it, and I mispronounced his name on the air. I said it was Osama bin Laden or something. And I read his words, and I looked at it, and I said, this guy's serious. You got to take this guy at his word. And I remember conservatives calling me up and yelling at me and saying, oh, you're just trying to help out the Clinton administration. I said, you got to be out of your mind. And I said at the time, within 10 years, there will be bodies and buildings in the streets of New York. Will you then fight terrorism? Right. And I feel the same way now, that people aren't willing to look at the unspeakable. And if we act now, we don't have to have all of these things. People don't understand, and this is what worries me. I'll live in any condition. I don't care. I'll grow my own food and whatever. But I worry about
it too.
Yeah, I worry about my kids.
Right.
Do they? There's no, in this scenario, if these things would come to pass, there is no Apple store anymore, right? There is no.
That's right, and we have ourselves to blame for this because we have built up a society of everyone's entitled to have what everyone else produces. We've become a kind of move very gradually, but in a much accelerated pace in the last few years.
They're trying to
this kind of socialistic attitude where what you have belongs to me and what you have belongs to him.
But we're trying to, even with this bailout, we're trying to build this back up and saying, oh, these houses, we'll be able to, it'll turn around. The malls in this scenario.
Ghost malls.
Ghost malls.
Ghost malls.
Okay. I want to talk to you now about something called the Bubba effect. I believe this part of the scenario is likely to happen, and I hope to God it doesn't. But we need to talk about it. Tim Strong is a retired Command Sergeant Major in the U.S. Army. Hey, Tim, how are you?
Hey, Glenn. Good evening. How are you doing tonight?
Explain what the Bubba effect is. This is something that the military has been concerned about.
Well, we'll go back to the segue of the survivalist attitude. It's that American that exists, that believes and trusts an American as it currently exists. And, they lose that faith and confidence within the various politicians and the areas that surround them. They end up developing their own infrastructure, their own means to survive, to basically fend for themselves. The disadvantage to that, Glenn, is with the Bubba effect is it's not the diesel trucks and all that as we currently refer to, but, they can critically be a key play when it comes to, having their own biofuel, that type of stuff to survive. They'll have their own community. They'll be very conscious of who enters their community, and it's almost going to be a commune-based society, but they won't project that based on the fact that they want to project normalcy.
Okay.
But those that enter their space that are threatening to them, and again, we don't want to use the word profiling, but you're definitely going to stand out. You're not going to look like a Bubba.
Okay.
And
so Tim, I want to break here. I have to take a commercial break, but I want to, at the bottom of the hour, I want to come back and show how that community, because that's like Mad Max community, how that actually starts here, how that is probably beginning, it has already begun here in America, and how it manifests itself. What are the other pressures that are building around the globe? And what if the U.S. can no longer be the world's policeman because the economy, the global economy, has broken down? That scenario when we return.
Warning. Topics discussed on today's program may be disturbing to some viewers. The views expressed in this program are not predictions of what will happen, but what could happen. The panelists have been asked to think the unthinkable. Viewer discretion is advised.